Did you know the woman caught in the act of adultery wasn't actually committing a sexual sin? In other words, the use of the word adultery in the Bible wasn't only used to identify a married spouse cheating sexually. Have you ever wondered why Jesus never asked the eyewitnesses who caught the woman committing adultery this question? You brought the woman, but where's the married man? I say that to say most people would assume a man was involved with her. I used to think the same thing until I examined a few other important details. If you recall, Jesus encountered several instances where he questioned several people regarding their intentions. And because of the seriousness of the law to stone this particular woman that day, I do believe he would have been compelled to ask that very question, especially since they approached him as if to receive his judgment to stone her for her sin according to the law. And to make things a little more interesting, Jesus was actually in the middle of teaching his new doctrine at the temple as everything unfolded. Ultimately, it became perfect timing for Jesus Christ to strategically showcase God's grace for the new covenant. And that's why I believe some would argue that the question regarding the man would be irrelevant. However, if you truly consider what was at stake regarding Jesus upholding God's law and what was at stake regarding this woman's life, you would see that all of it mattered. Remember, Jesus and his walk with God was always in question, and one false statement or one false move could have discredited him and everything he taught. I want to briefly read something that was said at that very moment so you can see my point. Let's go to John, the 8th chapter, the 4th through the 6th verse. It says, "They say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou?" This they said in the 6th verse, tempting him that they may have to accuse him. His walk, everything that he was about was always in question. Before we go any further, I need to make this disclaimer though, because there's some confusion regarding the phrase, quote unquote, the law of Moses. I mean, I've heard all different type of breakdowns of what that means. So I just want to kind of cover it just in case anybody has questions. If we go to 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter, the 9th through the 10th verse, which reads, "For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he it altogether for our sakes?" And I'm reading King James Version. That's why it has the, the weird words and stuff. But continuing on in the 10th verse, "For our sakes, no doubt this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and that he that thresheth in hope should be partaker of his hope." I'm paraphrasing this part, but he said, does God say this for oxen or man? He's asking the question. Just to be clear, it doesn't say, does Moses say this for oxen or man? I say that to say some argue that the law of Moses was simply a reference to what Moses gave the people. However, the law of Moses, that reference, was the giving law of God himself. It was just given to the people by Moses. So that's why they always referenced it accordingly. Let's read this last reference and then we can move on. It's in Luke, the 2nd chapter, the 22nd through the 24th verse. And this is just for context. It says, "And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses," that phrase again, "were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord." But here in the 23rd verse, this is why they're saying it. "As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord." So whose law is it? It's the law of the Lord, but they referenced it many times as the law of Moses because he was responsible for actually giving all of these instructions, these commands, the law to the people. So they gave him that title. And in the 24th verse, it says, "And to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons." So hopefully that clears up any confusion someone might have regarding the reference of the law of Moses, which was ultimately reverenced as the law of the Lord. Now let's examine Matthew, the 22nd chapter, the 15th through the 46th verse, to see what Jesus was truly up against. Starting at the 15th verse, it says, "Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk." As I discussed earlier, his walk was always in question. 16th verse, it says, "And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth, neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us therefore," 17th verse, "what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their wickedness. And this is, you're going to see the common thing, that Jesus will perceive someone's wickedness or their evil intentions and stuff, and he would call it out. But continuing on in 18th verse, "But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Shew me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. When they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way." He basically called them out, right? Okay, so the 23rd verse, it says, "The same day came to him the Sadducees, which say that there is no resurrection, and asked him, saying, Master, Moses said," there we go again, Moses said, let's just reference that, that's the Lord speaking through Moses, right? "If a man die, having no children, his brother shall marry his wife, and raise up seed unto his brother," which was from the Lord. 25th verse, "Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife unto his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And last of all the woman died also. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said unto them," here he go again, he's checking them, "Ye do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine." Jesus always checked the people that were questioning him or presenting something that was a little off, right? Based on these scriptures. Let's go on to the 34th verse. It says, "But when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence," right? This is what I'm trying to point out, that Jesus made sure that people presented truth, that they presented truth, right? Along with whatever they were questioning him or coming after him for. It says that they were gathered together. 35th verse, "Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets." While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, The son of David. He saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David then call him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. During his earthly ministry, many people tried their best to entangle him and his words according to the scriptures. But as we can see from what we just read, Jesus overcame all of their schemes, right? In other words, there was no shortage of people looking for ways to discredit his ministry. However, one thing we must take note of, even though many leaders misunderstood Jesus as he taught his new doctrine on many occasions, they never, please get this, and that's why he was able to stop them in their tracks. Many leaders tested him. However, they never argued with what was written by Moses in God's original law, nor was it generally allowed to openly blaspheme God's written word by teaching or practicing it incorrectly. We can look at the Pharisees and call them hypocrites all day long, but when what was written was presented, their mouths were shut. They did not go against it. They didn't try to make up their own interpretation as it was quoted. If somebody quoted the words that were written, that was it. That was in the discussion. They didn't sit there and say, well, it meant this and it meant that. We got to take note of that, right? So please keep all of that in mind, because it's extremely important regarding every public encounter Jesus had regarding the people and the law of Moses. With that being said, the question remains, what did everyone in the temple know regarding this woman's sin and judgment that we've missed? Because remember, there was no testing of what was presented. They presented their case to Jesus, and then let's continue so we can see what all played out. Remember, the witnesses that caught her and the people in the temple listening never suggested that stoning her by herself, key word, stoning her by herself, was incorrect. Neither did anyone ever suggest someone else had to be stoned with her. You might say, why does that even matter? Remember, the law of Moses. Let's revisit what they knew regarding any man or any woman caught in the very act of adultery regarding marriage, and you decide if this applies correctly with her case. Remember, these men publicly, not privately, approached Jesus with this woman, and they presented stoning her in the temple, which was the judgment from the law, as if to present their case to the judge in a courtroom. Keep in mind, this woman's life was literally on the line in real time as you read what's happening in John, the 8th chapter. In other words, I'm trying to make it as plain as possible. This wasn't a game. It was real. It was like her life, the last breath, was about to happen based on what Jesus would say in this particular moment right here. So let's read a main section of the law that dealt with adultery regarding marriage. However, please understand, this is simply one part of the law that deals with adultery, and I'm trying to make that as plain as possible. By doing so, hopefully we can get a better understanding of what the charges of adultery presented at that moment. So let's turn to Leviticus, the 20th chapter and the 10th verse. It says, "And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress, shall surely be put to death." Those terms are very precise. It uses adultery, man's wife, neighbor's wife, adulterer, and adulteress. Those terms are very key to what this particular verse is saying as far as putting who to death, right? So, based on the scripture of the law, both the man and woman must be put to death. Let me say that one more time. Both the man, the adulterer, and woman, the adulteress, must be stoned according to this judgment in Leviticus, the 20th chapter and the 10th verse. Remember, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, knew the law, and the eyewitnesses presenting their case in the temple had to know the law because they're ready to stone her for adultery. And as we know, they've made Jesus their judge in this matter. With all of that being said, I want to ask a rhetorical question. Do you think any prosecutor, aka those men or the Pharisees, would approach the judge with real evidence and dare the judge, aka Jesus, to abandon the well-known law from God, aka law of Moses, and judge the matter incorrectly? With that being said, now let's revisit that entire moment so we can see the full picture. Let's turn to John, the 8th chapter, the 1st through the 11th verse. Jesus went into the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple. And all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, like I stated before, they're actually somewhere in the temple when this is taking place. It doesn't specify where, but we know it's in the temple. So let's continue. 4th verse, it says, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? See how they said Moses in the law said that she should be stoned. It doesn't add anybody else in the picture, right? 6th verse. This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. Did he put them in their place at this moment of what they were saying regarding stoning her? Meaning that she by herself gets stoned. No. So there's a law that dealt with just her being stoned. And that's what we're going to get to the bottom of. But let's continue. It says in the 7th verse, so when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Have no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. If you recall in verses 4 and 5, they said Moses commanded us. Remember, if we go with the general consensus of how adultery in marriage is interpreted and taught today for this scenario, we would try and use Leviticus, the 20th chapter and the 10th verse, based on what Moses commanded. But remember, according to that law in Leviticus 20 and 10, both man and woman was commanded. Please understand, that's the point that I'm making. Both man and woman was commanded. At this particular point, only the woman was being commanded to be stoned. It wasn't just one person in Leviticus, the 20th chapter and the 10th verse. Both were commanded to be stoned if they were caught in the very act. The witnesses had to present a true case. Like I said before, Jesus knew the law, and the eyewitnesses presenting this case knew the law. And let's just assume most people in the temple knew the law. With that being said, we must agree the judgment in Leviticus 20th chapter and the 10th verse does not, I repeat, does not apply to this case. Remember, they couldn't publicly present the law incorrectly, especially in the temple of all places. Meaning, if we were to approach this confrontation with the common idea that's taught about adultery in marriage, we would have to agree the adulterer, aka the man, is missing. In that case, everyone in the temple, including Jesus, would be adhering to the law of Moses incorrectly, which would be against God's law. So we must be missing something, right? Like I said before, Jesus definitely would have called it out and said something like, you bring this woman to be stoned, but where's the man? Okay, so this is where it gets a little tricky. But before you discredit what I'm about to say next, hear me out. I'm here to say this wasn't a case about adultery in a marriage. Truly think about what happened. You have eyewitnesses. You have a woman that's not classified as someone's wife. There's no man, and they're presenting their case in God's temple. So what part of the law would justify her, the woman, alone, that I said before, being stoned in this real life situation that occurred? Where this allegedly single woman being caught in, quote unquote, the very act of adultery could lawfully be put to death by herself. I want us to read Hosea, the 3rd chapter and the 1st verse. Then said the Lord unto me, Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, who look to other gods and love flagons of wine. The woman in Hosea 3 is called an adulterous woman by God. Remember, it doesn't say go love someone's wife. So what makes this woman in Hosea 3 an adulterous woman? If we examine the text closely, it says, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, they look to other gods instead of God. In other words, they serve, sacrifice, and worship other gods. Can we agree Israel is cheating on God by doing these things? Let's read Ezekiel, the 23rd chapter and the 37th verse. That they have committed adultery and blood is in their hands. And with their idols have they committed adultery, and have also caused their sons, whom they bear unto me, to pass for them through the fire to devour them. It says, and with their idols have they committed adultery. I don't believe they can commit adultery with idols sexually, right? I'm going to just continue, though. Let's read Ezekiel, the 23rd chapter and 45th verse. And the righteous men, they shall judge them after the manner of adulteresses, and after the manner of women that shed blood, because they are adulteresses, and blood is in their hands. There's a common theme here. Blood, adultery. Blood somehow is in the picture, right? Let's read Proverbs, the 30th chapter and the 20th verse. It says, such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eateth and wipeth her mouth and saith, I have done no wickedness. Okay, so can you see the common theme? God referred to adultery with the things they did that involved the worship of other gods. Remember, the woman in Proverbs 30 and 20 is described as being adulterous. It implies that she's eating food sacrificed to idols and has no shame in it. Let's read a few verses that God said to Moses to add context to what we read in Hosea, Ezekiel, and Proverbs. Exodus, the 34th chapter, the 14th through the 15th verse reads, for thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Watch this. It says, and they go a whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice. What the woman was doing in Proverbs, the 30th chapter and the 20th verse. Remember those words, please, because all of it is pointing to a particular problem. Okay, so now that we've read those scriptures, I want to read Exodus, the 22nd chapter and the 20th verse. He that sacrificeth unto any god, save unto the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. Sacrifice to any other god, he shall be utterly destroyed. Please remember that scripture as well. All of it is very crucial to understanding what I'm trying to share with you. Now let's look at one example that took place shortly after that time God said those words. Let's go to Numbers, the 25th chapter, the 1st through the 3rd verse. It says, and Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat, and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal-peor. I'm sorry if I messed that up. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. You can read the rest when you get a chance, but hopefully you can see God's stance regarding the worship of other gods. Now, let's read what Jesus said in the book of Revelations regarding this same matter. Revelations, the 2nd chapter and the 14th verse. It says, but I have a few things against thee, because thou hast dared them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things, going back to Proverbs, the 30th chapter and the 20th verse, sacrifice unto idols, and to commit fornication. Revelations, the 2nd chapter and the 20th verse reads, notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication, and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. So what do you think so far? Do you still think the woman brought before Jesus was caught sleeping with someone's husband? And for those who are familiar with studying the Blue Letter Bible online, if you trace the meaning of the Hebrew words throughout the Bible, each translation of committing adultery can be tied to one of these illustrations that I'm going to present. I will put the info on the screen for blueletterbible.org. However, I'm going to continue on and read what it says. Okay, so the different illustrations are, for adultery is to be an adulterer. The second one is to commit adultery with, have unlawful intercourse with another's wife. Okay, another illustration is of the wife, to suffer adultery, be debauched. And then last but not least, this illustration is a Hebrew idiom. The word is used of those who at a woman's solicitation are drawn away to idolatry. An example, to the eating of things sacrificed to idols. Okay, so based on what we read so far, we know what should happen to a man and woman who were both caught in an unlawful act of sex if someone was married. And we also know God didn't tolerate the worship of other gods. Now let's read what was written in God's first covenant, also known as the Law of Moses, regarding his judgment for someone if they were caught worshiping other gods. Or, as we just learned, according to the Hebrew idiom's illustration of committing adultery, for those who at a woman's solicitation are drawn away to idolatry, the eating of things sacrificed to idols. By doing so, we should be able to tie everything together because remember, the eyewitnesses presented this woman to Jesus when the first covenant was the only covenant operating at the time. And as I stated before, we know Jesus forgave her, which was the authority God the Father gave him to forgive sins for the new covenant. But I want us to have a better understanding of what we're reading so we know how to rightly divide the word of God as it played out. And so we can apply it correctly for us in our time. Remember, context is everything. I'm always reminded of 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter and the 15th verse, which says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." Okay, let's read Deuteronomy, the 13th chapter, the 6th through the 11th verse. "If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely of the gods of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thine eye pity him. Neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him, but thou shalt surely kill him by himself. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people." Anybody that's included in the 6th verse. Remember, it goes down a list of individuals by themselves. This is what you're supposed to do. In the 9th verse, "But thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. Thou shalt stone him with stones, that he die, because he hath sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more any such wickedness as this among you." Based on everything that we've read so far that's tied to worshiping idols and eating things sacrificed to other gods, that's tied to the use of the word adultery, what the woman was caught in the very act doing sounds a lot more like the Hebrew idiom illustration found in Strong's definition, more than anything else, especially when you truly consider the full picture of God's law and that moment in the temple. It wasn't tied to adultery in marriage. I'm saying all that to say, always be encouraged to study, to show thyself approved unto God, rightly dividing the word of truth.